Welcome back to Sasquatch Hypothesis, the best damn Bigfoot show on the internet.
Big-chested, and it just was big. I don't know how to describe it any better than that. It's just made me look like I was a kid if I'd have stood beside it.
It had long, messed up hair on its body. It was big. I would say, if I had to guess, I would say probably 7-8 feet tall.
Grandma's going, and all of a sudden the kids are yelling and screaming, Grandma, Grandma, the monster's coming, the monster's coming. And she's like, what are you talking about? And this thing, apparently, it caught up with the truck and snagged one of the little girls and ran back up towards the mountain. That little girl was never found at all. What did this thing do to the little girl? Nobody doesn't know.
Sometimes irreverent and always abrasive, but we love him anyway. Right, ladies? Here's Reverend Rick.
First encounter was when I was followed or something was paralleling me in the woods. And I was down in Virginia in the Blue Ridge Mountains. My grandmother, we call her Granny, prior to living in this house where this happened, she lives in an old cabin, no running water. We'd walk down the hill, down the side of the hill, across the road to the dairy to bring water back to take baths and that kind of stuff. So that's the kind of environment this is, really out in the sticks. So she moved into this other house when I was about 11, 12 years old. It actually had running water, but, coal burning stove and all that. So me and my sister used to go down there and visit with Granny every summer. We'd stay the whole summer from about when I was 11 until the last year I was there was when I was 15. So this one year I was bored, so I decided to take a walk through the woods. And I walked a couple of miles down the side of the mountain through the woods, like up on the side of the mountain and down along the creek road, went past where Granny used to live and on down and that kind of thing. I don't know, just guessing, probably a half a mile from the house through the woods. I kept hearing these cracks, sticks cracking and stuff around me. Now, I was 13. I had no idea. I grew up in Boston. We only spent the summers down there at Granny's. So I was pretty much a city kid, had some exposure to the country, just living down there for the summer times. So I wasn't quite strictly city, but I didn't really understand the sounds of the forest that much, or the woods. And so I was hearing cracks, sticks cracking and that kind of thing. And I'm figuring, well, it's probably a squirrel up there stepping on a branch or whatever it is. Well, while I was walking, this little dog that Granny had, they used to follow me around everywhere I went, was like walking around in front of me. And it kept stopping and looking back and to the side, to my right side. And I would turn around and look, because it was obvious the dog was seeing something. And I'd look around and there would be nothing there. And then I'd walk on, and then I kept hearing these cracks, sticks cracking and leaves rustling and that kind of stuff off to my side and behind me. And I'm thinking, well, it's probably deer, because there were a lot of deer around there and black bears. So I figured it was probably some animal walking around out there. My family had always told me, black bears, they won't come near you. They're more scared of us than we are of them, and that kind of thing. So I wasn't too concerned about a black bear coming near me. I figured I'd know it way ahead of time, and I wasn't too nervous about it. And that summer there was black bears that were coming down off the mountain, and they were going through people's trash and stuff. So I knew they had been in the area. And I figured that's what it was. It was some black bear wandering around out there. And since I couldn't see it, it probably doesn't even know I'm there. It's just walking around doing its thing, and I'm doing my thing. No big deal. So I walked along, and then he kept hearing these sounds for, I don't know, half a mile. But nothing really eventful ever happened. It was just, in hindsight, looking back, I know that probably isn't what it was. It was probably this Sasquatch, because about maybe 2-3 weeks later, well, probably 2 weeks, it was pretty close to the end of the summer, me and my cousins were sitting around the table, Oh, well, let me back up. Before that happened, that little dog that was walking around with me, I found it squished in the mud back by the barn. This house that she was living in, you wouldn't even know it was there. But there was this house, a barn, a smokehouse, a hog pen. You know, she raised chickens and hogs. She didn't have any cows or anything, just chickens and hogs. But you wouldn't even know it was there because it was like back in the holler and kind of partially up the side of the mountain. In order to get there, you had to drive like through these trees, and you just plowed your car through the trees to get to the house. And, you know, the branches would scrape along the side of the car and everything. I mean, that's where it was. It was way up in the, on the hillside. So we were kind of isolated back there. If you look at Google Earth now, somebody had put a field out there, and it's not quite as densely forested around that house anymore, but the house and the barn is still there. But there was this barn out behind the house that was even farther back. It was maybe 100 yards back from the house, maybe 200 tops. And I was out wandering around one day, and I walked back by the barn, so I was always curious about the barn. But we never really went back there, because you get out there and it starts smelling really funny. It smelled like there was dead stuff back there or something. So I never went back there because it was, you know, kind of make your stomach turn. I went back there one day. I said, well, I'm going to go back there and see what the heck's going on back here in this barn. And I got back by the barn. I walked around on the barn, and it was full of like old, waterlogged hay that had been put up in there. Not like huge piles of it, but just a little bit left over that had been put up in there and left for years. You know, it turns kind of grayish and gets all kind of moldy and that kind of thing. So I figured, well, that's probably where the smell's been coming from. And as I was walking out, I was just walking around, and I found that little dog that was walking with me had been missing for a while. And it had it's not really a maggot. I guess it kind of is. There's this kind of fly that will land on cows and horses, and it'll lay an egg on them, just a single egg. And that egg will bore its way into their skin. And it just, one maggot will grow out of it. I forget what kind of fly it is. Well, this dog, one of them had landed on it, and it was in its neck. So when the dog disappeared, we thought, well, it just went off and died. That maggot finally got to its, you know, its artery or whatever in its neck. Well, when I was coming out of the barn, I was walking and I found the dog. And then I was looking at it, and I grabbed a stick, and I thought it was squished down into the mud, like squished flat. Its entire body was flattened out. It was, it looked like it got run over by a truck. And I couldn't figure it out. Why, how in the hell, you know, because she doesn't have cows. There's nothing back there that would have been heavy enough to squish this dog into the mud. And I thought, well, it rained, maybe just the rain, it sunk that far. And then I pulled it up, and it was actually flat. Its skull had been flattened. But, you know, I was 13. I'm like, I have no idea. And it was in kind of off to the side where the grass was starting to grow, because there was like a muddy area that led up to the barn that had some, you know, weeds growing. But you know how an old road that has been used a lot, you get the grass that grows in the middle and then some that grows along the tracks if nobody drives along it for a while. It was kind of like that. And then it got thicker off to the side. Well, that dog was like right on the edge of where the thick grass and weeds started. And it looked like it was in a flat spot. Now, I never looked. And I think this is honestly part of the problem with people finding stuff. Because when you're not looking for it, you don't see it. Because I wasn't looking to see if it was a big footprint, you know, but that's what I think happened, is that the Sasquatch stepped on the dog. Because I remember it was a big flat area, and the dog was squished right down into it. When I pulled him up out of there, you know, I could see that it was squished into there pretty good. I couldn't figure it out. But I wasn't looking to see if it was in a big footprint. I just know it was like a flat area around there. It looked like it got run over by a tire or something. It was like just flat. Anyway, that was the second thing that happened, was finding the dog. The same dog that was with me that kept alerting me to something following me through the woods is the dog I found flattened out by the barn that smelled rancid all the time, which in hindsight I suspect that Bigfoot was hanging out in there. Then about, I don't know, a week or so later, my mom came back down from Boston to pick us up, me and my sister. Well, the night that they got there, the adults were all in the living room, you know, yucking it up, talking. and me and my cousins were sitting in the kitchen, and we were yucking it up back there talking about funny crap that happened over the summer and that kind of thing. And I was sitting at the kitchen table, which was like up against the wall, the back wall of the house. And this is an old farmhouse, and I don't know if you'll understand what I'm saying here, but it had like one of those half windows, and it was up towards the top above the kitchen table. And my cousin Teresa was sitting to my right, my cousin Curtis was sitting to my left, and my sister was sitting there too. Well, we were sitting there talking, and I kind of sat back in my chair and started laughing at something my cousin Teresa said. And I looked up at the window, and I saw 2 white spots in the window. And I was like, and I looked back down, and I looked back up real quick, because it suddenly registered with me that I could see the reflection of the light that was above me in part of the window. But then I was seeing these 2 other things, which, you know, just as a quick glance, I thought was a reflection of something else behind me. And I'm like, well, there's nothing behind me. And I turned around and looked on the wall behind me, and there was nothing there. There was just a stove was behind me. And I think Granny had some, you know, one of those flowery plates or something hanging on the wall, but that was it. So I looked back at the window, and I can't figure out what these 2 white spots are. And then there was a full moon that night, and I realized I could see the trees outside, and I could see the top of the smokehouse, and I followed it along over towards the white shiny spots, and I saw the outline of like a fur hat. I'm like, oh wait a minute, there's somebody there, and I looked real close. Now the reason they continued their conversation and talking while I was doing all of this. Once I realized that it was a hat, or what I thought was a hat, which was crazy because this was August, and it was like, it had to be like 87 degrees. It was a really hot night. And I couldn't figure out, who in the hell would be wearing a fur hat? And I looked over at the 2 white spots, and I said, well, those are eyes. That's why. It's not a reflection. It's somebody standing there on the other side of the window. So I started looking real close. I figured they must be standing back to where the light inside the room isn't shining on them. So I started looking really close, waiting for my eyes to adjust for the darkness on the other side of the window. And then my eyes started to adjust to the darkness on the other side of the window. It just all of a sudden hit me. I said, well, no wonder I can't see anyone's face, because they're not white. They're black. I mean, I'm not trying to be racist or anything, but this is the mountains. These are hillbillies. There are no black people there, or at least back then there were no black people. You know, the nearest black people were 100 miles away from there. So I'm getting a little freaked out because I'm from Boston, and you know, I went through the whole busing and all that stuff when I was a kid. So, and my dad was in the Army. I had my friends were black. You know, black people went to school with me and all that stuff. So I knew what black people looked like. And I only say that because everyone else in the house didn't. The only black people everyone else in the house was, they might have seen black people on TV, and that's it. You know, they've never actually seen a real person. So I'm looking, I'm like, well, this is some black person. So now, and I realized that just as I was about, I'm like, well, that's gotta be Carl, my Uncle Carl, who's fixing to scare the hell out of us. So I was about to yell, you know, Carl, what are you wearing the fur hat for? It's hot as hell up. And then that's when I realized it was a black person, or what I thought was a black person. Just as I was about to say that, and I realized what I was looking at, because I saw, have you ever seen Sling Blade? You know that expression Billy Bob Thornton gets on his face, and he looks like he's all, you know, crazy dude. That is the look that this person, I thought, had on his face. His mouth was drawn way back, you know, and his lips were really fine. And I was like, what? I said, well, if this is a black person, this is a Looney Tune, because he's got this weird grin on his face. He's looking at my cousin Teresa, and he had this way his eyes were, because the window was above us. He was looking down at my cousin Teresa sitting in the chair, and his eyes looked huge, like really bugged out. And then between the mouth and the bugged out eyes, I was like, oh my God, we got some kind of crazy dude outside the house. So I was just about to say, what the hell are you doing out? Like, get out of here, you nutbag, and you know, something like that. And it looked at me. Just the eyes, its eyes darted over towards me. I don't know if my cousin Teresa looked at me or what, because I was too busy looking at it. And its eyes looked over at me. And when it did, as soon as it did that, I realized this is not a person. This is an animal. Because have you ever seen, I'm sure you have, if you, a dog is trying to protect a bone or something, and they'll look at you like out of the corner of their eyes, and then their head will slowly, very slowly start turning towards you. It's almost like it's a weird way that an animal does that. That's what it did. And as soon as it did that, it started slowly turning its head towards me. I was like, well, it knows I'm looking at it. It's looking at me, and it's doing what my dog does. That's not a person. And then I could see the texture of its face. What I realized after I stared at it for a minute and my eyes really adjusted was that I was actually seeing its face. It's just its face was so dark that when I was looking originally, I was looking for a white person standing there. So it wasn't connecting in my head until I realized it was a black person. And the way I realized that, I skipped over that part, is that when it was staring at Teresa, I saw that big grin on its face. I saw its nose, and its nose it was more of a, it instantly reminded me of the TV show Good Times. The guy who played the father, he had this really flared nostril, like just huge. He also played the gay lover of Charlie's girlfriend's father, but his nose was really, really flared, like huge. That's what it had, and that's where I was like, this isn't a white, this is a black person. And then as soon as I saw that, my eyes adjusted to looking for a black face. Then all of a sudden I could see his entire face. And that's when it looked at me. So when it looked at me, I started looking at the rest of his face. Because I was like, well, it's acting like an animal, but no animal looks like a person. Because at the time, I had seen, In Search of Bigfoot and all that crap when I was a kid. As far as I knew, it was in the Pacific Northwest. It was over in Washington State. It was one. There was only one of them. And it wandered around out there. That's what I knew. And so I completely disregarded it. Years had gone by before this happened. So it never even occurred to me when I was looking at this. I had no clue what I was seeing. And I just knew it wasn't a person because I've seen many, many black people. This was not a black guy, but a really strange black guy. So as I looked at the rest of its face, I could see. Now, when I was a kid, I had this thing where I used to love to draw monkeys. Gorillas, chimpanzees, and all that stuff. Monkeys, skulls, that kind of stuff when I was not much younger than when this happened, but around that time. So I was very familiar with what the features of a monkey were. And the first thing come to me was, this is a monkey. Well, it can't be a monkey because he has a nose. And then I started looking at the rest of the face, and there's a feature that I've never heard I've heard one person on your show describe this feature. Other than that, nobody has ever mentioned it. And that's the texture of the face. It's like leather. It's not like a person's face. It's like leather, and you could see the lines going up and down instead of like crow's feet and that. You could see the coming off of the cheeks, the lines that would run up and down the face were deep leathery looking lines, and you could actually see the sheen on right where the skin would where the grooves were in the skin. And I was like, well, that's a monkey. And I looked at its mouth, and its upper lip was really, really long, and I could see the lines. Those little faint lines that go up and down on a monkey. They go from like their nose down to the top of their lip. I could see that on this thing. I didn't see any other fur because it was too dark, I think. I could see the outline of its head, and its head was so big in the window that all I could see was from about the top of its brow to just below its bottom lip, and I couldn't see the rest of its head. So that picture I sent you is actually my interpretation of the rest of it, based on where the fur outline was and all that stuff. But so I have no idea about the chin and that, but this is what I did see: is the texture of the face, the lines on the lips, the very thin lips that are almost like just a line that goes straight across. The other part of it that wasn't really monkey-like, the mouth was pushed back. It wasn't quite as protruding as like an ape. You know how they don't have that domed look. It did slightly, because when it had its head turned sideways, looking towards my cousin, I could see the mouth going around and way back. So it did slightly have it, but so do we. You know what I mean? But it was a little more than us. But it wasn't anything like a gorilla or a chimp or anything like that. It was pushed much farther back. And I think that's why it had a nose. If you just take the mouth of a monkey and shove it back and leave the nose as is, the little part that connects, that pushes back, you would get the same shaped nose with big flared nostrils. And that's basically what it was, you know. So after I stared at it for a minute, and it was really enthused at listening to my cousin Teresa, it appeared. It was really taken with her. Because, I mean, the whole time I was staring at it, it never realized I was looking at it until, you know, finally its eyes darted over to me. I think that they're, and I've heard this before, they're big into kids, you know, like prepubescent, that kind of area. I think the sound of the female voice that age draws them. Because this thing was just, it was hanging on everything she was saying. Until, of course, it saw me. But anyway, then I was staring at it. We stared at each other for a minute, and it wasn't moving. And I was like, well, in addition to everything else, I realized it looks like a monkey, but it's not a monkey. It's not. I know it's not a black guy. And I said, and you know, I'm thinking in my head, well, it's possible because he had that weird grin on his face. You know, maybe this is just some escaped lunatic who was born with some kind of weird, you know, birth defect or something. It looks like this, you know. And then I realized, well, he's not moving. It was like it was trying to stay perfectly still. Like it knew I saw it, but it thought if it stayed still, that I couldn't see it anymore. That was the thought that went through my head the way it was. Because its eyes darted over and its head slowly started turning. And I don't think it really, like a dog, I don't think it realized that its head was turning. Because it was turning so slow, it's almost imperceptible. And I think it was trying to stay still, thinking I couldn't see it. Well, once it did that, and I suddenly went, this is an animal, and this is creepy. It just scared the hell out of me, and I ran. I mean, I don't think I've ever ran so fast. I just jumped, the chair went flying across the room, and I went in the other room. And my cousins and my sister followed right behind me. And I said, did you all just see that? They said, no, we ran because you ran. So, and then my mom and Granny go, what in the hell's wrong with you? What are you doing? And I said, there's the weird looking, and I didn't want to say, you know, because I thought, well, they're going to think I'm nuts if I say a kind of a gorilla thing in the window. So I said, this is really weird looking black guy looking in the window in the kitchen. And my Granny starts laughing, and she says, black guy? She said, there ain't no black people for hundreds of miles around here. And I'm like, well, all I'm telling you is what I just saw in that window. And my Uncle Mike, who's only 3 years older than me, he goes and grabs, in hindsight, this is pretty funny, he goes and gets his .22. And we go out the back door. I go out with him. We go out the back door looking for this thing. And evidently, when I ran one way, it ran the other. As I'm trying to explain this to them, my grandmother's friend comes up, but you could hear him come up on the porch, and he comes in the house. Now, my grandmother, she automatically assumes that it was him looking in the window at us. And I'm like, well, I got a good look at this guy. That was not him, you know, because I've known this guy since I was like 5. It wasn't him. And not only that, the guy could not have made it around the house. He was like 85 years old. He could not have made it around the house fast enough to get back in the front door. She goes, what are you scaring these kids for? He goes, what the hell are you talking about? He goes, what were you looking in the window out there for? He goes, I wasn't looking in no window. He says, but I heard something tearing ass up the side of the mountain. So me and my Uncle Mike go up the back, and the woods were 5 steps from the back door. You could actually just, because the kitchen was like almost like an add-on to it was like an old farmhouse that people kept adding rooms to. So the kitchen was just like an add-on to the back of the house. And the door was on the side. And when you walked out the door, you'd walk about 5 steps, and the mountain really started right at the base of the door. It started going up. So you'd take about 5 steps and you'd be in the woods. So we walked out there, and we're standing out behind the door, and we could hear something going, rustling around in the trees. So my Uncle Mike goes hauling butt up into the trees after it. Yeah, I'm going to shoot your ass and all that stuff. And then I don't hear anything. I'm like, Mike, you know, and he doesn't say anything. He goes, well, I chased something back up in there. He says, I think it was a buck. It was just pounding up the side of the mountain. And that was the end of that experience. They didn't believe me that it was, you know, of course I didn't describe exactly, but also my grandmother, chickens were constantly going missing. She had these 2 huge hogs. Nothing ever happened to them. But they had to weigh 600-800 pounds. They were massive. The biggest hogs I've ever seen in my life. Nothing ever happened to them. But when the chickens would go missing, we would find chickens with their heads tore off, and we'd find them all over the place. We'd find them out by the woods, back by the barn, you know. And I would say, Granny, what the hell's wrong with it? Why are these chickens doesn't have a head? She said, well, the hogs bite the heads off when they come near them to, you know, eat their food. And the hogs just bite their heads off, and then they run around because they're not dead yet. I'm like, oh, okay. But there was also chickens that went missing. And she said, chickens going missing all the time around here. And I think the hogs are eating. In hindsight, I think maybe the Sasquatch was helping himself.
Going back to the window incident, how far up is that window?
I was about 5'4" at the time. So that window, the bottom of it was about maybe to my chin. So it was probably from bottom to top, maybe 6 foot to the top, and about, 4.5 foot or something like that at the bottom. Something like that.
And then you're talking probably a couple more feet between the floor and the ground, right?
Yeah. I mean, the ground outside was a little bit higher than the floor inside because, like I said, the mountain came right down to the house back there. Really not mountain. I think from years and years of rain, and there's a lot of clay there, that the clay had slid a little bit. So, but no more than, from an average house, probably no more than 6 inches to a foot higher than the foundation kind of thing. So, whatever it was, it had to be squatting back there. It wasn't actually looking in the window standing. It had to be kind of crouched down looking in the window. I mean, assuming it was a Sasquatch.
Right.
But if I was standing back there, right now I'm 6'4". If I was standing back there, I would probably have to hunker my head down a little bit. So the top of the window was probably about 6 foot up. Bottom was, I don't know, 4.5 feet.
When you saw the face, would you describe it as kind of a Down syndrome type look?
I've known a few people with Down syndrome. I don't think I would. I mean, I guess in a way you could say that, because it was just it was like a goofy look. You know what I mean? Because I'm talking about Billy Bob Thornton and that whole,
right,
grainy head.
Right.
But as far as the eyes, being, they're kind of almond shape or slanty, almost like they're half Asian. Most Down syndrome people, but to me, that's the way they strike me. I wouldn't say so. I wouldn't say the eyes were like that. No, I guess not. It looks, the only difference in the picture I sent you from what I've seen is the nose. And that's because I couldn't get it right. And I would rather have it look more human than ape-like because I didn't want to represent it. It's just being like a monkey look.
Take a look at Australian Aborigine photos. A lot of folks will describe the nose like theirs.
Are they those real thin, high-nostriled kind of noses?
More wider, kind of flat.
Yeah. I would say, yeah. The nose doesn't stick out very far.
Right.
As far as the tip of it.
I sent you a picture a few minutes ago, so when you get a chance, take a look and see what you think about that.
Okay. But Down syndrome, I don't think so. I would say it's more, it looked like a monkey. It looked like a monkey with a nose, and the mouth was mashed back. That's what it looked like to me.
When you were describing, when you first saw it, looking at your cousin Teresa, and its eyes were bugging out, and what you described as a grin. When it finally looked over at you, did the facial expression change at all?
No, But when it slowly turned its head towards me, its mouth disappeared below the bottom of the window.
Okay.
So, but when its eyes started towards me, I could still see its mouth. I did not see any change whatsoever, except that its eyes were looking at me now, and its head started to slowly turn towards me. Other than that, the face didn't change at all. It didn't show its teeth or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it didn't growl, which, thinking back, with all the other stories I've heard, on your guys' show and everything, yeah, I'm kind of surprised. But I'm thinking, because when I think back about what it looked like in the descriptions and some of the artist renderings I've seen, although I don't know how accurate they would really be, most of the people that I've heard that have seen these things and try to describe them have seen them from 20, 30 feet away. And I think if this thing was standing 20, 30 feet away from me in the dark, I wouldn't see the details that I saw. The reason I saw the detail I did was because the light was shining right on its face. See, that's the other thing. Their skin kind of absorbs light, except where we have this cat. The Halloween cats, the black cats. They usually have the arch back and all that stuff.
Right.
Well, we have one of those, and I forget what the heck the breed is, but they're actually not black. They're brown. And you can't tell that they're brown until the light hits them a certain way. And then when you see the brown, you're like, wow, that cat really is brown. And you can't believe that they look so black when you see the brown, because they're really brown. But because of the way their fur is, it refracts the light in a certain way that makes them appear black. And when our cat gets out at night, you can't even find him, because you can actually look at right where he is. And even though you can see the shadows, you can't see him, because he's more of a void than he is a shadow or a dark object. You know what I'm saying? There's a subtle difference. He's more of like an absence of light in that spot rather than a shadowed area. And I think that's what
it's a very good description. It made me think about the two that I encountered when I was 16 at about 15 feet away, and it was starting to get dark, so that's a great way to put it, where the skin sort of absorbed the light, because now granted it was a fairly quick encounter, and I was kind of scared, at the time, but I didn't really notice a lot of the facial detail. I did see the eyes. I focused on that, and I think because of the lack of light under those circumstances, probably obscured those details.
Yeah, and I think that's the problem that some people have with their descriptions, and that's part of the problem with getting a good description of them, is that once the light starts to become less and less, their skin becomes darker, an order of magnitude. It's like what do you call it? Exponentially becomes darker, because they're actually refracting or whatever.
They start becoming a shadow, basically.
Yeah, or a void of light. Because I did CG. I did some CG work way back, in the 90s, before I started with this peripheral neuropathy crap. And there's this thing called subsurface scattering that you do when you're doing a CG creature. And what it is that most skin has actually multiple layers of color. And there's this calculation that you can add to a surface that's called subsurface scattering, and you can pick the colors and so forth and that. And what it does is it adds kind of like a refractor index to the surface. And it changes the way that it looks based with light hitting it. And that's what I think is going on with the Sasquatch, is that their skin, the pigmentation in their skin, does some kind of strange subsurface scattering, where when the light is hitting it, it actually reduces the amount of reflection that's coming back off of it.
It's almost like a natural camouflage at certain times of the day.
Somewhat, yeah. Somewhat at night, absolutely. At night, they would appear to just be a silhouette cut out in the environment. That's the way it would look.
Which is their primary feeding time, by the way.
That's just an observation I made, because when I saw this thing, once I realized what I was looking at, and I could plainly see it, once I adjusted my eyes to see what I was seeing, that's exactly the quality that I noticed. I was like, the light's shining right on this thing, and yet it's really difficult for me to see it looking in the window. you know, because it had its face close to the window, you know, so the light was shining right on it, but the only reflection I could see was, like I said, in those crags that were running up and down its face. And that reminded me of, if you've ever seen a gorilla, like footage of a gorilla or whatever, when they have that black face and the sunlight comes off like a shine on where the wrinkles are on their face. It was just like that. And I'm like, that's the only place I can see. If it wasn't for that, it would look like a complete void right there.
Yeah, you're picking up that 3D detail there.
Yeah, and that's the only way I could make out its face. Because it was just crazy the way it would, the light didn't even seem to affect its skin at all.
That's probably one of the most interesting details I think I've ever heard about the light skin.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I just want to say that for 2 weeks in a row, I have a disturbing image burned in my head. I mean, the grinning Bigfoot watching your cousin is just, wow.
Yeah, and the look, it's just, if you've seen Sling Blade, I mean, that was exact. It just had this really big, it was creepy.
Disturbing.
Almost an evil look.
Yeah. Well, no, it was more simpleton. It was more, that's the only reason when he asked me about Down syndrome that I was kind of hung, because that's what was, when I first, that big grin, I wouldn't put it as a Down syndrome, but I would put somebody with some kind of a mental defect like that. You know, somebody who's a little, because it was the way he was looking at Teresa was like it was a very simpleton, crushy kind of thing. That's what it struck me at first. But that was when I thought it was a person. I was like, well, this is a creepy, strange person who evidently has the hots for Teresa, you know, until I realized that it wasn't a person. So I don't know. That's just probably just the way his face looks, you know. But that was the way it looked.
I just wanted to thank you for coming on the show and taking the time to share.
Oh yeah, sure. You know, everyone's always told me I'm crazy. It was a black person, but it's not a black person. I mean, as far as the other episodes, they may or may not have been. They may have been a black bear, may have been a brown bear. I don't know. But looking through the window, that was, without a doubt in my head, Sasquatch.
Yeah, and what you described in terms of the skin texture and coloring and everything, we've heard that a number of times from other people actually that have seen them up close. So you're right in the spectrum where it should be.
Yeah. What about the ones that are supposedly, because there's supposed to be 4 species, I guess, or races, I guess? Well, is that matched?
That's what our government insider, Mr. Black, tells us. There are 4 different types. I would say in that part of the country it's probably the type 2.
Is that the general description though? Because that patty, I actually took a picture. That picture I drew, and I put hair on its face similar to Patty, and it does kind of look like Patty. It really does, but not so much. As far as the artist rendition, though, because you really can't tell from that footage what the face really looks like. But the artist rendition, who I assume is somebody who's pretty talented and they know how to reconstruct and all of that, looks more like a person than what I saw. What I saw looked more like a monkey. Actually, your episode 54, your last episode, that guy who talked about the one with the dog, you know, he actually described it the way that I was trying to describe it when I was a kid. You know, it was kind of a strange, or what I had thought about anyway, it was a strange looking black guy monkey thing, you know, it wasn't, and he kind of described it very, very similar to what I did. I don't know where he was. I don't think he ever mentioned, but, you know. Anyway, well, yeah, it was great to be on the show. Great to get it off my chest. And the other thing I wanted to say before I forget is the thing about the eyes. Not the red eyes, but I've explained to people that there are whites to their eyes because, you know, I told you that's what drew me to the window. But their eyes don't look. They have whites to their eyes, but it's more like if you've seen a Labrador. You know, and I kind of exaggerated the whites in that picture a little bit. I wanted to home the fact that they do have whites to their eye, but it's more like a lab. You know how they have whites to their eyes, but you can only barely see it around the edges. You know, unless or if you're looking to the side, you can see it. That's how this thing was. It wasn't like a person where we have these little tiny colored areas, they're larger, but they do have whites to their eyes. Yeah, because I've heard Kathy Strain or somebody, she was talking about seeing one in some place in Montana, and she said they don't have sclera. I'm like, yeah, they do.
Yeah.
You know, so she's saying that they don't. Well, and then I thought about it. I said, well, if they look directly at you and they're at a distance, you might not see it. Because, you know, like a lab, I think it kind of, it's a little dark at the edges of the colored part of their eye, but there is white, you know, and if you're up close, you would probably see it.
The first two that I saw, I could see the white, but you're right, it wasn't a great deal, you know, but you could see it around the edges.
Right, yeah. Well, I'm glad you're verifying.
Yeah. No, you're right on the money.
Well, I guess that is exactly what I saw. And, you know, it had to be. I just, at the time, I was like, I have no idea what the hell this thing is.
Well, you'd hope you're looking at human now.
Yeah, it's like, this is just creepy, whatever. You know, it's acting like an animal.
Right.
You know?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. Well, it was great talking to you guys.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rick. Sure appreciate it.
All right, you guys take it easy. Good talking to you.
The face story, that was awesome. That was great detail, and he told it very well.
It really creeped me out. That wasn't even like a play on words.